Right. Tēnā tātou katoa. Morena. We seek wisdom, understanding, insights into the views and circumstances of others, strength to seek what we believe in, humility to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy while working in the best interests of our community. So, welcome along. I'm sorry we're starting a little late. Flu seems to have hit the ranks of councillors, and we have apologies, actually, in this case from Councillor Daniel Newman and Councillor Greg Sayers on council business, but on electronic attendance we have Bill Cashmore, Josephine Bartley and Shane Henderson, and they are all suffering from an illness that they don't want to share with the rest of us, for which we're grateful. So first of all, I will move that we accept apologies from Councillors Newman and Sayers for absence on council business, Councillors Fletcher and Henderson on council business. So that shouldn't be right. I think Councillor Henderson is online, and somebody has just taken away the list from me electronically. So councillors, and for lateness, councillors Stewart, Walker, Watson and Young. So I'll move that we accept those apologies. I second it from Councillor Casey. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, carried. And I'll move that we accept electronic attendance under Standing Order 3.3.3 from Councillors Bartley and Henderson and Deputy Mayor Cashmore. Deputy Moore Cashmere. So I'll move that again. And do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Linda Cooper. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no, carried. Next item of business is any declarations of interest from councillors. No declarations. We have the confirmation of minutes of the 24th of June and the extraordinary meeting of the 29th of June. Can I have somebody move that? Councillor Simpson. Somebody to second that? Councillor Filipaina. No matters arising out of minutes. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no, carried. We have no petitions, no public input and no local board input, and I have been advised of no extraordinary items. So we come to item number 9 on the agenda, which is the Ports of Auckland Limited progress with implementation of the Independent Health and Safety Review recommendations. So if I can, I've got Sarah Johnson-Smith here, and should we, do you want to talk first, Sarah, and then we'll so I will get the resolution on the books. I'll move that we receive the report. Can I have a seconder, Councillor Simpson, and invite Sarah Johnson-Smith to talk to the report, please.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, councillors. I'll just do a short introduction and then hand over to our ports representatives, which I can introduce now. We've got Wayne Thompson, the interim CEO, and Vanessa Matakatea, who is the Senior Health and Safety and Wellbeing Senior Manager at the Ports of Auckland. So they'll run you through a short presentation. But in terms of the report, you'll recall back in April, Council received the final report of the Independent Health and Safety Review that was conducted by Chesons. That review made 45 recommendations, and the Port has committed to implementing all of these. So at that April meeting, Council made a series of resolutions, which included Resolution C, which asked the Port to present to the governing body meetings in July and in October on progress with implementation of the review's recommendations. So the memo and the report in attachment A responds to this resolution. Ports of Auckland will provide a more detailed report to the governing body in October, and that will include the independent advice from Chesons, who will be giving their assessment of the Port's progress with implementation of the recommendations. And that independent advice was requested also by the governing body through Resolution F. So that gives you the context for the report. And unless you have any questions for me, I'd welcome the Port representatives up to come and give their presentations.
So if there's no questions of Sarah, if I can invite Wayne, Vanessa and Matt to the table. While they're coming up, can I also acknowledge Russell and Simon from the Maritime Union at the back of the room, And just draw your attention to our unanimous decision, resolution number G, which said, expect the board and management of Ports of Auckland will engage closely with the workforce and their union representatives to fully implement the health and safety recommendations of the independent review. I'm just going to, you know, we sometimes throw brickbats. This time it's a bouquet to ports and to MUNs that are working closely together on this. And Russell said he didn't mind me saying that he thought that the relationship between the union and the ports at the current time was the best that it's ever been, and how pleased they are, Vanessa, with the job that you're doing in your responsibility for health and safety. So, starting on a very, very positive note, I'll invite you, Wayne. I think you're leading off, are you? And then I'll leave it in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to provide an update to the governing body and council. I might just start, given Vanessa is reasonably new to the port and new to some of the people around the table, just ask her to do a brief introduction.
Thank you, Wayne. Kia ora koutou. Vanessa Matakatia toku ingoa. Just to give a little bit of background on how I've got into the role at the Ports of Auckland. Spent 10 years previously in the telecommunications industry as a service provider to Chorus. Halfway through that time, the ultra-fast broadband network is what got me into safety specifically, with significant risks involved in that space of installing ultra-fast broadband throughout New Zealand. Became the national manager for safety and wellbeing for Vision Stream, being the service provider for that network. From there, I went into Fletcher Construction on the New Zealand International Convention Centre. Unfortunately, shortly after starting, approximately a month, the fire occurred on that site and spent the next 15 months recovering from that. That was an experience for me towards safety and wellbeing as well, from all aspects, and leading from that into the Ports of Auckland. Saw the opportunity, actually saw it about a year earlier, jumped at the opportunity for the Ports of Auckland. My background is I am an Auckland girl at heart, always have been, and very proud of that. And being involved in the Ports of Auckland was a huge part of what that represents. So once I sort of got in there, met a lot of the people that are in there, feel very at home, feel very, it's where I'm meant to be. So happy to be contributing, and thankfully in a good way, but certainly recognise the opportunity of the report coming in shortly after me starting, having put that in front of me as a great opportunity to pick that up and run with it. So, thank you for that, Wayne.
Thank you, and a big welcome from all of us. Kia ora.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, I just want to start with an opening statement that as a interim CEO and new management team, we can't go back and fix the past. But what we can do is sort of work on and deal with the future. And that's what we're committed to do as a team. Sort of the key messages we want to leave you with today, and you would see we have a detailed plan in place following the review. And we put a lot of time and effort into developing that very detailed plan. We've also put a high degree of monitoring around that plan to make sure we're keeping to that plan and we are successful against the outcomes that are required. We're making good progress against that plan. We have completed 7 of the points in the plan, and we've got another 29 in progress. There is a lot of work to do in this space. We have resourced it. We've resourced your team, and there's a commitment right across the business in delivering against this plan. We have re-engaged Chasms to come in and review what we're doing. It's important that that third party keeps an eye on our progress and holds us to account and runs a ruler over us ticking these off as we achieve them, and we'll keep that going. Part of the core of this plan was working on staff engagement, and we believe that is improving, and it is a core focus that we are. Yeah, it's a core thing we are focusing on. We can get some wins in that space. It comes in and underpins what we're trying to do with these health and safety objectives. So there is a lot of effort going into that. Having said that, I'll hand over to Vanessa, who will sort of run you through in more detail where we're at and what we're working on.
All right, so essentially we've got a few slides to take you through, but by all means, open to the floor if you want to ask questions as we go through that. I understand we'll do questions at the end as well. The first slide is really talking to the report itself. So as you're aware, 45 recommendations were made out of that report. What we've done is we've picked up those 45 recommendations, committed to every single one of them, and through that created a forecast of completion timeline and what it would take to achieve those. The report that we've provided you and will provide you on a monthly basis gives you the high-level summary of the CHAS-NZ report. And essentially that's all it is. It provides you the summary, it gives you the tracking status of each recommendation, the forecast of when we expect to have it completed by, and what the priority is on each of those recommendations, with some being higher than others. You'll see just in that quick snapshot on the screen that the 45 recommendations are spread out and will be complete by June next year. It's a good goal, it's achievable. I wouldn't have put any of those dates on there if we didn't think it was achievable, but certainly there's a detailed action behind each of those recommendations to achieve that. What I'm demonstrating in this particular slide is to achieve the 45 recommendations, and if you've read the descriptions of those recommendations, some of those are not necessarily a specific action on what needs to be done. There can be statements made that you need to improve this, but not necessarily how. So to achieve that, we had to build a safety and wellbeing strategic plan for the Ports of Auckland, which I would have done coming into any new role anyway. So we built the strategic plan, and I had actually started working on that before the CHAS-NZ report had been released. We've pleasantly, not surprised, but happy to see that when the recommendations came through 3 months after me starting, it was very much aligned with my own interpretations of when I went into the role. So the detailed strategic plan is the how-to. So we will provide you the CHAS-NZ monthly report, but our strategic plan is the detail of how we're going to achieve each of those recommendations. In some cases, it may take 2 or 3 actions to achieve one of the recommendations. As a result, our strategic plan has 80 actions that we'll need to complete in that same time frame. So what this is demonstrating you are the 7 recommendations we have completed on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side are the specific actions we've done to achieve that. So if I use the very first one, which the recommendation is to continue our support with the port industry, essentially the action we've taken from that is that I've joined the PIA Industry Forum, and I'm actively involved in those forums on a quarterly basis, but also on a regular basis, checking in with other ports. Having visited 2 ports already in the time that I've been here, good to get some of those relationships building. So I see that as a necessity to building those relationships for that one recommendation. So again, just I won't go through all 7, but just giving you that example of the action behind the recommendation is a little more detail. Moving on to the strategic plan, to the CHAS-NZ report. This is highlighting to you the 29 recommendations. So yes, we've completed 7. Essentially, we started 45 at the start of the time the report was released. We had already started most of it. So the 29 recommendations are in progress, are most certainly in progress. Some of those nearing completion, some again just need 1 or 2 more things, and they'll tick off the box as well. What we did with the strategic plan, linking it to the CHAS-NZ report, is we assigned an executive sponsor from the executive team of the Ports of Auckland on every one of the key objectives. So there is a member of the executive team supporting each one of the objectives and helping to drive that. My request of them is that they be the face and the front and the lead and the sponsor of those key objectives, so that it's not perceived that it's all happening by the safety team as such. So certainly needs to be a Ports of Auckland strategic plan led by the executive team. And then through that, we've also, as Wayne mentioned, engaged TASNZ to review the recommendations, review our strategic plan, review the completed recommendations already. That took place last week for the first time. So they've come through and we'll likely get a more formal report. But I'm happy to say they were very pleased with the shift in culture and shift in the feeling of the Ports of Auckland since they were last there. This is the strategic plan. So the 80 actions, as you can see, exact same format of the report, provides me a summary, provides a forecast of completion, the tracking status of each one, and the priority status again. So really just showing you the action plan behind the recommendations. We pulled out a couple of key areas to discuss today, given the concern. Automation safety case was one of those. So I wanted to share with you that the Ports of Auckland has engaged an automated straddle systems expert to develop an automation safety system plan. The approach to that essentially has been sort of taking it back to scratch and looking at what that safety plan needs to look like. A key aspect that's come into that safety plan is the ASNZ 4024, which is essentially the safe use of machinery. And this was likely a bit of a gap to what was there previously. So certainly had safe systems in place and safe practices around the automation system. The gap was how it integrated with the rest of the Ports of Auckland. So safe use of machinery starts to apply that extraordinary safety requirements around that. The control measures that have come out of that will be specifically linked to a control system. So again, linking it back to the importance of that. But more importantly, the verification and validation of any safety requirements will continue ongoing as well, whether it be internally or with our vendors. Worker engagement. This is my passion. This is the reason I'm at the Ports of Auckland. The strategic plan was established with and for our Ports of Auckland employees, contractors and key stakeholders. I'll come back again and say this is, without being too overconfident, this is what I'm good at. So talking to people, listening to them, hearing their voice, giving them a voice, making sure that they are contributing to our strategic plan has been the #1 priority for me. Through that, we've established we've reinstated 8 safety and wellbeing committees who essentially were all there and had a voice but wasn't coming out strong enough. So we've given them some very good structure to allow that voice to be heard. There's approximately 80 representatives in those groups right across the business. Union officials participate in our container terminal committee, so we've actually invited the union to our health and safety committees also, and actively have conversations with them around health and safety outside those committee meetings also. The Safety and Wellbeing Engagement Forum really has strong representation, so fair to say I think some of the business units have sort of been left to figure out health and safety on their own. We ensure that there is a health and safety rep at every one of those safety meetings now to support and govern their needs. And visible safety leadership is really, really important for me. So we are and will be spending quite a lot of time growing the levels within the business of what that means to us at the Ports of Auckland. Any questions?
Sorry, look, I hope that was useful and gives you sort of a good update as where we're at. You know, the approach we're taking here, health and safety is continuous improvement. And we're on that journey, and we will continue on that journey, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Wayne and Vanessa, for that. That was a really good account, and just to be able to get that feedback from the Chasns group that did the review, that the culture is being changed at the ports, I think is really, really positive. And we welcome that. But I'll just open it up now to see if we have questions. I have the first question from Councillor Wayne Walker.
Couple of questions. First question just goes to health and safety around automation and the like. Assuming that process requires more dependence on computers and that interface, is part of the health and safety looking at security against hacking by having some form of internal separation from other systems? So that's one question.
Definitely. So going into automation, as you know, that was a number of years ago, very aware of cyber issues. So it's fair to say, as a port, we have gone quite cyber heavy. We employed one executive. We were lucky to have him in the port with a lot of experience, and we've built a cyber team. We're one of the few businesses in New Zealand too that have what we call a CSOC, so we have a group of people monitoring what's happening on that network 24/7. We've also got that outsourced to a supplier as well. A lot of not all, but most of the automation equipment is in a separated network. We call it our OT network. It keeps it away from the everyday corporate network where there's a whole lot more risk.
Okay, so that's a really good answer. The other question I've got just goes to the overall health and safety strategy that you're putting in place, and it follows on from your comment about visiting other ports. I'd assume, but correct me if I'm wrong, that what we're doing in ports of Auckland around health and safety could be New Zealand leading. I don't know whether other ports are at, but I'd be interested to hear what you've got to say on that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So as Vanessa said, she's acted with other ports. We can pass on and we can learn from them as well. What I will say, I think it's a little bit premature, but I would love to see Ports of Auckland taking a leading position across the industry. I think it's a little bit soon until we've worked through a number of these initiatives and got our own house in better order. But I think there's a lot that we have learned that we can share, not just with ports, but with other industries and other people and other parties as well. So ultimately would like to take a leadership position.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pipacoon.
O tēnā koe, Your Worship, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, tēnā koe Vanessa, great to see you in this role and the opportunity to present today. Good to hear how things are progressing. I have two questions. The first one, I just wondered if you have had the opportunity to work across sectors, and I'm particularly thinking about the City Rail Link. I met the head of safety there, I think his name's Rob Mayer, when we had the tunnel opening, the tunnel boring machine ceremony, and his approach and implementation to safety just seemed to be day and night compared to what our experience had been with the port and the best practice that he had brought from the UK, particularly around the engagement of workers and the approach so that safety is absolutely top of mind, and they're determined to get through that major infrastructure project with not one single fatality, and obviously aiming for zero serious injuries as well. So are you in the position, I mean, I know you're quite new to the role, but is that the learning opportunity that we have across sectors within Auckland?
Short answer is absolutely. So having come from other sectors, telecommunications, construction, and then sort of coming into the port, it's certainly been an eye-opener for me to look at the port and compare to those sectors. So I have, even since I've been at the port, met with the head of health and safety for Kiwi Rail, other sectors, the Sky City still connected with some of those representatives as well. I think going back to the earlier question in relation to the industry, there is certainly a state that we need to improve. There's certainly some learning that we can get from other sectors. Health and safety is generally health and safety much the same across most sectors. How it's applied in the engagement space comes down to the individuals that are working in the executive team. Like any health and safety, it's led from the top. So the sectors will offer different risk. And in the port, there's certainly critical risk involved in that space. So the risk may change, but the approach to health and safety should be 90% transparent. that answers
you.
your
And
question.
could you just confirm where your role sits within the organisation and what team you have supporting you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I currently report through to Wayne as the interim CEO. And when I arrived at the Ports of Auckland, I was one of 5. I now, as at next week, will have a team of 15 in that role. So I have certainly recruited a number of people. I can openly say that 50% of those recruits have strong health and safety qualifications, but the other 50% are people-based engagement specialists to help with that culture shift.
Ngā mihi. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, and it was good. One of the recommendations, I think, was that the senior manager of safety and wellbeing report directly to the chief executive. So that's something that has now been put in place, and I think that brings health and safety right into the forefront and the centre of what the port's doing. So welcome that as well. Councillor John Watson.
Thank you. And just in terms of that changing culture, could you just please clarify for me again the role of the union in the various committees? So I see a number of safety committees put up, and I think I heard where they were invited along. Certainly one of my concerns, prior to this has been the, the apparent sort of absence of the union in an official capacity in terms of health and safety. So could you just please spell out in a little more detail exactly what the position of the union is in terms of, I guess, membership of a committee or a group in terms of, authorised input, if I can put it that way, or official input?
I'll answer that at a higher level, then I'll get Vanessa to add to it. But I think there's 2 ways of looking at it. Our own staff are on those committees, and as Vanessa said, there's up to 80 people across the port, and a lot of those are union members and union voted the members onto those committees. The major change is that we have representatives from 2 of the unions, the major unions and the container terminal, officials now on those committees, and they are fully active members with full input to those committees. Then outside that as well, as Vanessa said, there's a lot of more day-to-day contact with union delegates and with union officials that we're working on putting structure around that contact as well.
Great.
Probably the only thing I'd
Sorry,
like to
Vanessa.
add. Yes, sorry. Probably the only thing I'd like to add to that is my approach. I have not in the past had a lot of experience dealing with unions, but my approach to it is generally the unions are out for what's best for the people. Health and safety is always what's best for the people. So 90% of what we're talking about should be very closely aligned. So that has been the approach to the conversation. I'm again open, giving them a voice. They are there on behalf of their people. If their people are not comfortable to talk to us and they want to do it through the union, then the message should still be the same. So that has been how we've received it and certainly requested it.
Well, I think that's an encouraging starting point, Vanessa. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore online.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Wayne, Vanessa and Matt. It's lovely to hear from you, and thank you for the report. I've got 2 quick questions. The first one's to you, Wayne. How are you relating what's happening in the health and safety space on the ground at the port back to the board, and are they having direct experiences of that?
The answer is yes, definitely. So one vehicle for that is quite important. The board set up a health and safety committee that meets monthly, which management report to. Vanessa has full access to that committee and all the committee members, as she does to the full board. So very good engagement at the appropriate level of detail between the board, more detail engagement between management and the committee. So that's working very well from our point of view.
Thank you, that's good to hear. The second question is to you, Vanessa. When you work through often these implementation, these things like the health and safety, the CHASMS report, you identify other things that not have been missed but have not have been prioritised, or that there are shortfalls. Have you identified anything that is over and beyond the CHASMS that you wish to see implemented?
Yes, I don't know if I would call them over and above the CHAS-NZ. They could be implied as addressed through those recommendations either way, but the one key area I've probably pulled out is injury prevention. So I essentially the review is very much focused on systems and culture. The piece around injury prevention activities and reducing injuries more specifically through injury prevention methods. Again, another passion of mine is the well-being of our people, and I'm confident that if we address the well-being through whether it be physical or psychological risk, so again, quite passionate about the psychological risk that we achieve through the well-being of our people, we will absolutely prevent injuries through that space. So I have certainly added more in our strategy around that piece of work.
It's great to hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thank you, Mayor, and kia ora koutou, and welcome Wayne and Vanessa. Good to see you, and Matt. Vanessa, you just mentioned earlier on that you had engaged, I think it was a specialist straddle safety person. What was the correct title of that person?
The safety systems expert.
Safety systems expert.
Automation.
Is that a vendor's representative, and is that person on the ground, or are they advising remotely?
No, they're not from the vendor. It's from a company that specialises in automation around the world. The particular individual is based in Australia. He has spent significant time on the ground. At the moment, with the travel bubble, he can't, so he's working remotely from Australia. But we've basically engaged him for a number of hours per week in the safety space, but in the overall sort of contribution to the overall automation project as well. So he's bringing a wealth of knowledge, largely from the implementation within the Australian environment.
Okay, so he's been on the ground, he's familiar. It's not like we're facing another, a remote person.
No. He's been here, and he will be back when we can get him back in from Australia.
Okay. Look, while today is not about interrogating the automation program, but there's a crossover between the safety component of the automation to ensure that it can be progressed to the next stage. What sort of, roughly in percentage terms, how much do the safety concerns around automation, how do they add up to the overall program of reaching go live automation?
Sort of repeat what Vanessa said before. So, there's a lot of safety things in place around automation. It's not as though we were sitting there worried overall about the safety and where it was at. I think the hole that Chasm pointed out is it needed more structure. So it needed to be in a systematic approach, and we've chosen a standard that Chasm have agreed with to sort of implement that overall structure and overall system across automation. If I had to comment on automation, my comment is safety trumps everything in regard to everything we're doing at the moment. And it's fair to say, and I don't want to get into automation, timeframes, etc. It's not really the environment, but safety will trump speed, and safety will trump timing of that rollout as well.
Okay, thank you. And just one final one. It's probably about our ongoing relationship. There's a reset happening, and I appreciate that. Wayne, you're in the helm now. And it's something, Mayor, that I've raised with you and the Chief Executive is we need to ensure our Chief Executive has a constant dialogue with Wayne. I understand that has been reset. It's something I've been asking for about a year, particularly when you're dealing with a multi-billion-dollar asset. And I've been critical of that relationship. Jim, would you like to just outline when and how this is happening now? I understand that you are now meeting with Wayne on a very regular basis. I'd also like to know how we as councillors get updated on the information that you learn from those exchanges.
Thanks, Councillor. Yes, Wayne and I had a meeting on this very subject on Monday, in fact, of this week. And we have agreed to meet on a fortnightly basis ongoing. to maintain an open dialogue around key subject areas of interest, operational performance, health and safety, productivity, being the main themes of that discussion. Wayne has undertaken to provide me with a short form operational update on a regular basis. I suspect that'll be monthly, but we're yet to kind of work through the detail of that. Of course, while it's not our job to get involved in operational management matters, we do take a very active interest, and I'd certainly be willing and prepared to share that with councillors as we get that process underway.
Thank you very much. And last question is from Councillor Richard Hills.
Kia ora, thank you. Just want to say briefly, and obviously the proof is in the pudding, not just the words, but just the conversation here is probably the best conversation I've had with the Ports of Auckland in the last couple of years as a group, and I feel hopefully this means a relationship change. I have not felt comfortable in the last few meetings over the last couple of months or year. So thank you for that. And Vanessa, I know that you coming to us with what you've had today is really pleasing to hear as well. I guess my question that, and I know it's covered slightly, but so you can have all the health and safety regulations in place, but how can I be confident that with the issue that happened in June with the software situation and what could have been quite a dangerous situation, how can we ensure that the level of investment you're putting into the automation and software will ensure people are safe? Like, how can we feel confident that what you're rolling out will make sure people are safe?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is definitely what we referred to before. It is having the safety case in a system, in a more systematic process around it. It also goes to the timing we've decided on now rolling out that plan, where I said safety trumps time. And as we work through a number of phases to go to full terminal rollout, hopefully towards the end of March next year, safety is the key gateway right across that. It's about the testing, it's about a relationship with the vendor, it's about the training with our staff, it's about the system controls that are in there. So it's multi-layered, if that makes any sense, approach to safety in a automated environment.
Thank you. And just the last
I can just, add a little bit to that, is just to broaden the scope of that, not just on automation, to give you any assurance at all across health and safety across the Ports of Auckland. Giving our people the voice is the answer to that. So when I came in, there was certainly a level of fear there that they couldn't talk, or they couldn't raise those risks in relation to what they were. We're certainly breaking that barrier. So for me, the voice coming from our people, that if they're not comfortable with something, they will say so.
Thank you. And just quickly, last question probably for you, Wayne. I guess in the past, and we shouldn't focus too much on the past, but we've been told, it's none of our business, things like this. Do you feel, with your current leadership or with the discussions around the board as well, that even though the legislation and everything else sets out what we actually do have a say over, but do you understand why we still feel like it's our business, and I want to know that you feel it's okay for us to be asking around the safety and well-being of Aucklanders, including ports workers?
I think the way I'd answer that is hopefully you've seen that change today, and prepared to present where we're at, and prepared to be as open as we can be and as transparent as we can be in answering the questions. So hopefully we've demonstrated that.
Yep, thank you very much.
Thank you. And a late bid for a question, Councillor Al Filipina.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnā koe Vanessa, ngā mihi ki a koe, mō mahi. Look, my question is in relation to on our report number 8, and that relates to Chas NZ. And I've got one question for Ports of Auckland and then one procedural question to you, Your Worship, if I could ask that. So in regards to Chaz NZ, Vanessa, what is your role, knowing that they're independent, what is your role in regards to their work, which according to this under 8 started on the 21st of July? And so that's one question, please.
So essentially the role is to be open and transparent. So essentially they came through from the 21st of July, open door through the business. I spent 3 hours with them in the first instance, taking them through our strategic plan, what that looks like, and then essentially set them up with a number of visits through the rest of the business so they could feel the shift and ask any questions. Open and transparent is essentially our role to make sure they get that.
All I'd add to that is we actually value that independent review. It's important for us to make sure we're getting that independent review as well.
Tēnā korua. Your Worship, my question is on number 6 with the recommendations we had through. So I know the ports are coming back in October to report. It was July and October according to the recommendations. There's also under F around the Chaz NZ reporting back to us. So we're going to have 2 reporting in October. One, the Ports of Auckland is in regards to the update on the 45 or with what came out with the review, and then another reporting, which is Chaz NZ coming back to us around obviously their independent review that started on the 21st. Kilda.
Yeah, the answer is yes, the Ports of Auckland is due to report to us as they are today in July. They'll report again in October, but in addition in October, having engaged Chazins to independently review what the situation was on the ports, which they did thoroughly, and then came up with a blueprint for what needed to be done. And we've had an update on the 45 recommendations today. And if you look at one of the earlier charts, it shows that actually probably that was June. By next week, we will have achieved significantly more of those recommendations. But what I wanted to have was to maintain Chazins having developed a level of expertise around what needed to happen and to recommend what should happen. I want them now independently of the port to report back to us and say, actually, this is the progress they have made, or these are the things that they still have to do. And that just gives us some assurance. But I think most of us around here will have felt quite a level of reassurance from what we've heard today and the feedback we've also had from the Maritime Union. And everything I've heard today and the feedback I got earlier from the union was that things are heading in the right direction. Having said that, you are operating essentially in a high-risk environment on the port, and none of us can say with total assurance that there will be no more accidents. What I need to be able to know is that everything is being done and everybody is working in the same direction to prevent further accidents, and I'm increasing in my confidence that that is happening for the first time in 4 years. So, great. Hope that answers the question.
Yep, so the answer is yes?
Yep.
Thank
Absolutely. If I can thank everybody from the ports that are here, and Sarah, I'll ask you now to withdraw from the table and see if there's any further comments. I think the questions have been what have really elicited the information that we needed. But congratulations to what you've achieved. Congratulations to you and the ports on working together with the determination to fix that situation on the wharf. That's really reassuring. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, are there any further comments that anybody wants to make? Tracy Mulholland.
I won't talk too much, Your Worship, but just to say I acknowledge the good work that's done. I acknowledge other councillors who have made these efforts to see improvements for the safety and well-being of the community, and I support what has been said. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you should preserve that voice, Tracy. If there are no other comments, the motion has been moved and seconded. So I'll put the motion that we receive the report. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And those are contrary, I declare that carried, and once again thank the ports and the Maritime Union for attending today. Right, we now come to item number 10 on our agenda, which is the Auckland War Memorial Museum Q3 update. And if I can invite to the table Dr. David Gamester, Chief Executive. Welcome, David. Sumit Barnett and James Liddell. I think I've got the three of you here. Now, in order to put this on the record, that I think our motion is to note your third quarter report. I'm happy to move that, seconded by Alf Filipina, and I'm very happy to note that your revenue compares very favourably to the predictions, to the extent of being nearly 5 times higher than what you're anticipating. So if there's any other good news that you want to report to us on, feel free to do that. So I'll now invite you to speak to your report. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here.
Tēnā koutou katoa, Marena tātou. Thank you very much for the opportunity to meet with you today, Meg Off and councillors. Very pleased to provide you with our Q3 performance update. That goes, of course, to the end of March, so the information is a little historic now, but I'm going to just pick out some highlights from this quarter and then give you a quick overview of our more recent performance, which helps to contextualise what's been happening and trending over the last few months. Of course, during this particular quarter, the museum operated under a terrific amount of disruption, of course. We had 2 lockdowns of the museum, 2 closures of the museum in February and March, and each lockdown was followed by a considerable period operating at level 2, which of course means social distancing and other regimes. So a very disruptive period, the first part of the year. However, despite that disruption and these challenges, we were able to achieve a number of, I think, major milestones. Firstly, just to highlight the opening of the museum's new Tamiki Heringa Waka Stories of Auckland galleries, our new permanent gallery suite dedicated to the people and places of Auckland, past, present and future. It's proving highly popular. There have been some very, very positive media reviews, and I very much encourage you all to take a good look at that gallery suite if you haven't already. We also hosted our Brickman Lego special exhibition during the period, proving very, very popular with our family audience and children. We had we had 112,000 people buying tickets for that exhibition. So huge pent-up demand for those kinds of experiences, and able to deliver that on the floor of the museum. Very, very satisfying for us and for our audience. And we've also introduced a whole series of new public experiences, public access opportunities, including opening the museum up on Tuesday evenings, rooftop tours, new membership events, and a whole series of different initiatives to increase access to our content. We also were part of a series of conversations, of course, with the Council Executive Working Group to discuss the planning framework and approach to the forthcoming financial year 22-23 draft annual plan. And in the last quarter, you asked us to include some information about our activities that contribute to national outcomes. So we provided some examples at the back of the report, and we'll continue to do so in future updates. The officials covering report notes that income earned over the period was $3.136 million compared to a budgeted revenue of $664,000. So our commercial revenue, clearly supported and helped by special exhibitions and other initiatives, was clearly better than anticipated. Of course, when we were doing those projections in the deep, deep bottom pit of COVID, we were very, very conservative. So we've had a lot more visitation and engagement, even despite those interruptions. And our income has been boosted by other features such as research grants and donations. And those research grants have been tagged to, of course, to specific research projects. You remember that we were awarded a $13.5 million grant from the MB Endeavour Fund last year for a research project with Ngāti Kuri at Rangitahua. These revenue sources have, of course, quite substantial costs associated with them. And since the official report notes, and hence the official report notes that we've had greater than expected expenditure, of course, too. It's important to note that that revenue has very, very low profit margins. That's our social profit operating model, of course, as a museum. Our increased revenue plus tight cost controls, however, have allowed us to claw back our operating deficit slightly. So 1.2 million at the third quarter versus a 2 million budgeted deficit at that point. In our year-end of accounts, you'll see a sizable operating deficit still in accordance with our annual plan. That's part of our post-COVID budgetary trajectory. Our international tourism, of course, that's our leading income segment. That continues to be entirely absent, and that continues to exert a terrific amount of pressure on the bottom line. So our current modelling shows us continuing to post operating deficits over the course of the 21-22 and 22-23 years, as you're all aware. So how have we been performing to the end of the last quarter 4, more recently? We don't have audited results yet, and you'll receive these in more detail at the quarter 4 update and in our annual review. But I can share just a few highlights with you today. In terms of programming, the museums continue to perform well in very difficult circumstances. The Anzac Day services generated a visitation of 15,000 on that day. So we're back to where we were pre-COVID in terms of those major commemoration events, those major civic commemoration events at Auckland Museum. Our Sea Monsters International exhibition is proving hugely popular with our family audiences. All of the sessions during the school holidays were sold out. And in that first week of the school holidays, we had 31,000 visitors to the museum. And the second week, we had 29,000 visitors to the museum. Those weekends were very, very busy. If you were on the domain at that time, you'll have noticed. Huge pressure on parking and on the domain itself. But it's almost, as a museum director, I can say it's a nice problem to have. And it represents, if we look at our records, probably the highest visitation in the records that we have on visitation to Auckland Museum. So really, historically, extremely high visitation and public engagement, and that's saying something about the products that we're offering at the moment. Our total visitation now, we've got those figures for the 2021 year, that was over 513,000 against a target when we set in COVID of 401,000. So we're still below our overall pre-COVID levels, but that's something we're obviously very pleased with, that return on the year, which was interrupted multiple times. But that visitation that I've been describing, let's just remember, that is without our international visitation segment, which is our biggest revenue. So that is all Auckland. That's the local and regional culture market coming to Auckland Museum and engaging with museum content. That's very, very pleasing for us as an institution. We've been able to switch to service that community audience much more effectively. And that's one of the, if we're looking at benefits of what's been going on in the last few years, then I would say that that's been a real switch for us. And that creates a great platform for community engagement going forward. So that's pleasing. I'd just like to note my appreciation publicly to the staff of the museum. This has been a very, very challenging year. And as always, I'd like to thank Auckland Council for your ongoing support. And finally, I'd just like to repeat my previous offers to you, councillors, to come and visit us, come and see behind the scenes. I think around half of you have come to see us already, and I'd very much like to welcome others to come and see how we're operating in the next few months. That'd be wonderful to see you. Thank you so much, Naomi Nui, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, David. And as one that's done the rooftop tour, I can recommend it to any of my colleagues that still haven't done it. And it's not just the rooftop, it's behind the scenes. And the museum's a bit like an iceberg. We only see the tip of it on exhibition, and there's so much happening behind the scenes. And look, if you can get down there for maybe 1 to 2 hours, I think is probably a good period of time. James is nodding on that one. It's well worthwhile. And congratulations on a number of the things that you've put up to us. Not having been a Lego kid, I'm just blown away by the fact 112,000 people paid for tickets to go and look at it. And it means that you're connecting in with what people are interested in our community. And to have more than 500,000 visits without any international visitors, one of the great things, no, let me rephrase that. COVID is appalling, but one of the consolations are that people are starting to think about what we've got in our country, and you represent a fantastic asset. That's why we put 30 million a year into that asset, and it's great to see Aucklanders taking advantage of it, learning from it and enjoying it. So big congratulations, I think, from all of us around the table. Now, open up for questions, and I have the first question in the name of Councillor Desley Simpson.
Oh, kia ora, thank you. And David, thank you again for what you do and for your report. It's really, really positive and it's great. Look, I've got a couple of questions that I'm just keen to ask, and it's around the paid exhibitions, because obviously the Lego was so successful. As a grandma, we had to go twice because once wasn't enough. But how many paid exhibitions do you plan on having a year? Do you have a budget for that, or do you just have them as they come through?
Yeah, in our plan, as you'll see in the next draft annual plan, we're looking at 2 major international touring exhibitions pretty well every year, sometimes across the financial years, so almost 2.5 in that respect. Yeah, that's very much part of our new operating model, which is really about engagement with Aucklanders, providing a really strong cultural offer. Most Aucklanders, really almost all Aucklanders, can't travel the world at the moment, where our mission is to bring the world to Auckland and to bring international cultural highlights to the museum and to enable our audience to engage with those. So, in the pipeline, we've got the Ancient Greeks exhibition from the British Museum next year, for example. Those exhibitions, they are always expensive, but it's very much part of our operating model to be able to buy those in and to cover our costs and to use them as a platform for cultural engagement. And that's proving very, very successful, as we're seeing with Sea Monsters at the moment, which was provided by the National Maritime Museum in Australia. We're one of the few institutions in the world that are able to bring international exhibitions to major metropolitan centres. You won't find that going on in Europe at the moment or North America. We're really quite exceptional. I mean, I would really look hard to find an institution that's operating at our level at the moment, and being able to bring quality exhibitions to us. Many of our counterparts are not able to do that at the moment, and our closest colleagues working in Australia are really struggling. But we're a trusted institution, and New Zealand has a very, very high level of trust, and we're able to go out to market and actually find some really great exhibitions for Aucklanders at the moment. That's another consolation of being in this country and in this city at the moment. That's quite interesting.
So thank you. Do you keep data from who actually attends, especially the paid exhibitions? Do you know whether they are Aucklanders or out of Aucklanders? I'm just interested
in... Yes, we do. Councillor,
and have you got that breakdown? I'd be interested in looking at that, because
we can provide that to you.
You quite rightly identified
we can give you a rough estimate.
No one's going anywhere, and I just wondered how many of them were...
It's predominantly Aucklanders, and that's a very large radius, of course.
But it would be interesting for us, we're regional councillors. How many?
Absolutely, absolutely.
How many people from
I think the regional audience is sitting at around 10 to 12% in terms of out of Auckland. So predominantly you are looking at Aucklanders and the radius that we reach around Auckland in terms of that main visitation. We keep quite sensitive information on through our booking systems and also through membership. So we're able to, through the various data regimes, we're able to analyse that visitation profile in quite an effective way. And then use that data to market to, cold spots and hot spots and so on, depending on what the trend is. So today we're using technologies to be able to build audience in different ways. So that's something that we could report back to you either at the next quarter or separately.
And quickly, how's the public transport working? Do you think?
I wish we had more, and I think that's one of the biggest barriers to cultural visitation, of course, in Auckland. This is not a museum problem. This is a problem that we all face. People coming into the central city, being able to access the museum easily. Parking, there's only one scheduled bus service to the museum. And given the fact that we are the biggest visitation attraction in the city, it is problematic and it's causing huge pressure on the domain. And we talk about this issue together on the domain committee, and we know and we need to think about how we manage that situation going forward. It's a very, very precious amenity. But if you were on the domain last week or the week before, you would have seen people parking all over the landscape. The museum has 189 car parks. There is a limited amount of private parking, and the public transport offer is relatively small. And we need to think about that more strategically. That's something that I think we can only solve together. We can't solve as a museum on our own.
I just wanted to alert everyone to that issue there. And finally, is your restaurant paying its way?
Absolutely. We've had the biggest take that we've ever had in our hospitality. It's proving very, very popular. If you were in the museum in the last 2 weeks, you'd have seen queues going out of the two hospitality points in the museum. It's proving hugely popular, getting great reviews, and it's a destination hospitality offer now in a way that it wasn't before. It's still a museum experience, and we're very, very pleased about the partnership that we've built with that expert provider. Thank you.
Thank you. Some really good questions there. I'm be very keen for you and Auckland Transport to sit down together to work out how we can get people from where they're coming from directly. I don't know whether the Parnell station is making much difference yet. It may not be. But what we can do to link up to facilitate people getting to the museum and being able to advertise that. The second thing, and it's by way of a question, is if we're getting 10 to 15% of the visitors coming regionally from out of town, obviously we exist predominantly for Aucklanders, but we're very keen to share and we're very keen to attract people from around New Zealand to come to Auckland to help out our hospitality industry. I would be interested in whether you were working with Auckland Unlimited to see ways in which we can promote the museum as an attraction for people to come to Auckland, stay overnight, stay in the accommodation, go to the local bars, restaurants, etc. On the steps, yeah. Well, you might just like to one comment on people sleeping at the museum, which is new to me, but secondly, whether you've had that discussion with Auckland Unlimited to determine whether you can be part of the broader attraction of Auckland to our fellow New Zealanders in the absence of international tourists to the city.
Kia ora, thank you for that question, Magoff. Yes, we are having conversations with Auckland Unlimited. We do see Auckland Unlimited as a key partner for being able to promote our offer more widely. We see ourselves as a tourism attraction, we always have done, and that's national tourism. I think we're an anchor for that potentially, particularly with our programme. But we need to, I think we need more conversations, more strategic conversations about how we work more effectively with Auckland Unlimited to actually get that message out there. And Auckland Unlimited has come together very recently. There's a new executive group, and I'm very excited about having the opportunity to talk in more depth about how we can work better together.
Tell them how you sold out staying overnight at the museum.
Yes, the other
it's a
aspect of the
it's a new
question.
product overnight at the museum. We haven't done that before. There are so many interesting outcomes out of what we've all been through in the last few years, and we're trying all sorts of new strategies. And we're opening up the museum in well beyond that 9 to 5 experience. It's now an evening experience, and we experimented with sea monsters with our first ever family sleepovers. They were all sold out within hours. We're going to do more in the next school holidays. If you look on social media, you'll see some lovely videos captured by parents who are very brave. I would not want to do that. If you've ever done that at Kelly Tarleton's, you'll know what I mean. But it's proving hugely popular. And yes, bed nights is one thing, but we can provide those too.
Yeah, glamping at Eden Park and sleeping over at the museum. The world's changing. It's not as I knew it. Councillor Angela Dalton.
Thank you very much for your report. And my question was around parking as well. I brought my grandchildren through to Sea Monsters last week, which was really good. There were so many children, school children, enjoying themselves. But I could see the challenges with parking. It took half an hour for us to find a park. We drove because we were on a limited time frame, so public transport wasn't going to work out for us. Otherwise, we could get the train to Parnell. So the car park there were queues for the car park. And when you book a time, I'm just wondering if, because we were on a limited time, if we hadn't pre-booked, we might have just driven off and come back another time. But we had pre-booked and we had paid. So there's the anxiety of booking a time and then taking half an hour when you don't realise that that's what the parking's going to be like. So what the strategy is the strategy to meet with Auckland Transport and get support for more public transport? Is that the strategy?
Yes, it is part of the strategy. Certainly, we do need more support, and we do need better public services. There's only one scheduled bus service. It's only a half-hourly bus service. It's great, and it's the first time we've ever had bus service to Auckland Museum. I think we've only had it for about 2 to 3 years. Thank goodness we've got that. But that's the only direct connection, public transport connection to the museum. Parnell Station is geographically, strategically, beautifully positioned and should be supporting and helping us. But the pedestrian access between the station and the museum is too challenging for most visitors. And that's something that we all need to think about as well. And then we have to making huge inroads into better managing the public parking on the domain, and we've developed some new initiatives to manage the Tatoki Street roads more effectively to really preference and privilege those people who are using the amenity rather than commuters who are dropping cars off early in the morning, taking up the parks and then working elsewhere. So we recognise there's a big strategic issue about access, parking and transport being a barrier to cultural access, and that's something that we are talking about on the Domain Committee. But I think we really need to escalate the urgency of this matter with AT, given the fact that our domestic audience is growing rapidly. There's new demand for local attractions, and there's going to be a lot more pressure on all of the cultural and leisure attractions around the city. We need to think about that more strategically. That's something that really I haven't seen happen yet.
I agree. I was just wondering if you get a lot of feedback that supports the challenges, because there must be some pretty anxious periods or aggravated periods.
It's the number one, Councillor, it's the number one issue in terms of public feedback and negative feedback. Everybody loves the offer, and once they're in and they can settle down and enjoy the offer, that's fantastic. But getting in during peak periods, weekends and school holidays, particularly school holidays in winter, bad weather, it's a perfect storm, literally. And we had really that experience the other day with 5,500 visitors. We had to close the north entry because of weather conditions. And really, I think we need to use this as evidence base for how we resolve the access issue and transport issue during peak, particularly. Yeah.
Congratulations on Sea Monsters.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Got some financial questions. In no particular order. It would be really helpful just in the revenue and operational side to have a breakdown around the commercial offering as it goes to the restaurant and the shop, because quite obviously they're immensely successful. So that's less a question for now and more a question for, you know, the future reporting. The other question, that's also a financial question, goes to the new work that you're doing around national outcomes. It'd be great to have some quantification around that. And again, that's less a question for now, but more for later, because what you're doing there is particularly significant. And the other question that also goes to finances is it would be useful to have some projections around what your patronage and financial position might be if we've got much better public transport, if we've got more promotion on the part of Auckland Unlimited or the like. If we had those projections and those projections were out there, that might well drive a response. So I'd be interested to know that. That's not so much a question for now, but to work on for later. If you've got any projections and you can tell us now, great.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. I'll take the first one first. So from commercial revenue perspective, our event hire and retail offering have been the key in the last financial year, and they continue to perform well. As David pointed out earlier, the lack of international visitation has impacted, although we see on the top line the revenue is up, the profitability due to the lack of international visitation has impacted severely. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a overview on the commercial. Obviously the exhibition is a key part of that as well, as we talked about. I'm not sure, David, if you want to take the other question.
If I could respond very, very briefly on the question of national funding that you raised. Councillor, sorry, apologies. I can answer or address the question you raised on the question of national funding. Yes, it's something that we are beginning to work on in terms of identifying the national benefit of Auckland Museum and quantifying what that might look like in terms of the national benefit. We're working together with colleagues at Canterbury and Otago Museums on that very question. They are our counterpart metro museums that have the same legislative and funding model as Auckland Museum. So what might be, it's just almost a theoretical question really, but what might be a more sustainable funding model in terms of national and local funding for these major cultural assets in the regions of New Zealand in the future? And we're putting some thinking and some analysis together, and we're going to be sharing that with ministers quite shortly. That is really intended to initiate a discussion about future policy settings around funding these kinds of institutions in New Zealand. So that's the stage we're at. We're just at the point of being able to move forward with that initiative.
The last financial question I've got just goes to donations, requests and others. I'm making the assumption, but again you might clarify that those items are often tagged, so they're not available as a subsidy to contribute to the museum's general operation. If that's the case, it would be useful to indicate that.
Thank you. That's absolutely right, Councillor. The philanthropic funds mostly are tagged to specific research activities, and we see on the top line the revenue coming in, but there's an equivalent amount of expenditure that's tagged to it as well. So from profitability perspective, there's very little favourable impact, so to speak, but it furthers our whole core of the research activity that we are involved in.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pipacoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kia ora koutou katoa. Tēnā koe, David. Thank you very much for presenting and providing the results. I'm glad you're keeping the pressure on about access, because I totally acknowledge that it's a massive issue as a member of the Domain Committee. And I just wondered if it's worth noting that we want to be able to get people who need to be able to drive to the museum and the Domain, but 80% of the parking spaces are currently occupied by commuters, and the AT have advised, and is this your understanding as well, that really the only tool that we're going to have that we can fix this is introducing paid parking into the Domain, and also government changing the fines, which are currently $12 a day. And it's just been there's been no appetite politically, but at some point, and I guess that's why I'm raising this around the table as well, we're going to have to bite the bullet and decide, are we going to fix this problem or not? And that might be, 2 hours free and then paid, but that's the only way that we've been told we can address it. Is that your understanding as well?
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you very much. Yes, that's my understanding as well. I mean, but I think the whole situation is becoming increasingly urgent, particularly, and COVID has again exposed the issue because we're getting a lot more engagement, a lot more visitation, and during peak it's just become very, very problematic, and it's our biggest source of complaint, and it's the biggest barrier to cultural access in the city. So it's a systems issue that we really need to address, and that's beyond the museum's power. I would hope to discuss a strategy for how we engage with our transport colleagues, with the Domain Committee firstly, and then move forward so we get the right outcomes for all Aucklanders.
Yeah, and I know Chair of the Domain Committee definitely, and Member Fletcher's also another member of the Domain Committee, that we're very keen to address this as well. Oh, and Councillor Stewart, sorry. So it's definitely within our brief. So I hope that we're definitely very, very conscious of it. But I guess we're going to probably need to get a wider political support, because if we progress this, everyone kind of needs to understand why we're doing it and what we're trying to achieve.
If I could just add one further thought to this issue and the urgency, the Domain sits in an area that's becoming increasingly intensified in terms of residential and other businesses. We're getting some of the biggest retirement villages in New Zealand built on the edge of the Domain. There's so much more pressure on this landscape, and it really does need, I think, a very, very careful review of how that is going to be managed in the future. And then in this situation, we've got museum visitors, people seeking cultural access, competing with a whole range of other users and other needs around this landscape. So it is a systems issue, and it is something that we need a really strong strategic review of.
Thank you. And I just had a quick question, if I may, just on the membership. I don't know if I've brought this up before around the table, but just in terms of it's great to see that you've met your membership target already. And I just wondered if you'd implemented the hack of the membership around promoting that you can actually get free entry to the exhibitions when you buy a membership, which wasn't totally obvious when I bought my membership for my nephew at Christmas. It took a lot of work to figure that out because it wasn't advertised. I know this is probably a very operational thing, but I was very excited when I figured the hack out about how the membership was such great value. And I just think your targets around membership could be, much more ambitious when you have awesome exhibitions and you sign up all these membership members who would then have an incentive to keep going back and get free access.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, it's a culture shift for Auckland Museum. We didn't have that offer before. We've introduced membership, but we only introduced membership on the back of a special exhibition programme. So there's an obvious connection between the exhibition offer and membership. It's an incentiviser and a motivator for people to become more closely connected to the institution, and then to use that platform to drive new experiences and deeper enrichment with our content. And that's proving really, really successful. And I hope you're seeing an interesting programme offer around membership, not just through exhibitions, but certainly the exhibition platform is a very, very important motivator. And that connection is becoming clearer to our audience in a museum that didn't operate on that basis previously. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Councillor Richard Hills.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. First of all, congratulations. You guys are doing a fantastic job, and you see it on social media everywhere that people are going to the museum. So it's great to see that the investment is playing out as you'd hoped, that the revenues are up and the visitation is up, especially when the struggles of COVID are still here. My comment just, I guess it's first as a comment and then it's a question. So my comment is, and you do mention it on your website around the outer link and the inner link, but I do want to be careful around the language of we only have one bus route and it's not very often. Actually, for a lot of people, not all, not parents with kids, maybe not for older people and things, but for a lot of people, if you were more pro about the inner link and the outer link, actually they may see it as a viable option. It's only 400 metres walk away from the stop. It's every 10 minutes. It's throughout the city. So if you've got as many people that are able-bodied to be seeing that as a viable way to jump off, I mean, it's 1,000 metres from here to Britomart, and this is only a 400-metre distance. The other thing I'd like to work with you, AT, the main committee, whoever, is getting this a stop moved or an extra stop up by Monsell Road, and then you would get off the bus and look straight down at the museum, so it would be much more viable, and then you'd cut off about 100 metres there. So actually there is a two really good bus services that go past the road the museum's on. I guess just the language that may be used, there's no buses going into the museum, might make people assume there isn't actually really good bus services. So yeah, so I think in short term, if you could put maybe a picture on your website showing the walking route from the bus stop, and people might go, oh, actually that's no big deal, that's pretty easy. Yeah, so, but I'm happy to work with, I think there's an easier option than trying to get a route from everywhere right through the museum grounds in the short term. It's probably just an extra stop, or you might need a crossing too. But I think those services are 10 minutes all day, 12 minutes all day. So yeah, cool.
Thank you. Just if I could just make one final comment on that, that's a very helpful comment. Thank you, Councillor. We have been working very hard to try to get a better and a stronger profile for that service. That has been a bit of a struggle. We lobbied and we were successful in getting signs on Parnell Road from the link bus stops to the museum, so that directing people along the new pathway on the domain up to the museum, but it is a 400-metre walk. Our family audience, and we are predominantly a family audience, that's 75% of our audience, that's just a stretch too far for most of those. Independent travellers, no problem, and that's what that is, that works. But for our main audience, the family audience, that's the biggest issue, and one of our councillors described a scenario, and that's so typical for most of our visitation. That just doesn't work. And we are promoting that as an option, but maybe small adjustments like being able to just move that stop to the entry of Monsell Road and just give that people line of sight would be a real help. It's a psychological thing we need to get over. We need a lot more promotion around the link service, connecting cultural institutions. I mean, there are the art galleries on the same route. It doesn't take much to actually just present that as a way of connecting and creating a cultural journey across the city. And I'd really be grateful if we could have another conversation about how we might leverage and elevate that idea to our transport partners.
I'm just seeing a way that we could mop up at least the people who are able, so the car parks are free for the people who have to use it if they, and especially, there's a lot of able-bodied people over 65 who would like the free option over, and if they knew that they could get up there quickly for free instead of paying for parking, it might help too. Thank you.
Thank you, that's very useful. I'm always impressed with Councillor Hills' knowledge of bus services around the city. It's unprecedented. But I think the point that he makes is a good one, and that you've responded to, David, that a joined-up approach between some of our other agencies would be able, I think, and a chance to advertise. This is where you get off if you want to get to the museum, because unless we bulldoze the fields and make car parks, we're not going to create new car parks up there. Right, I've got two more questions, and we're going to finish with that. Councillor Sharon Stewart first.
Oh, thank you. Very good presentation. Most of the car parking, a lot of the car parking there, would you say comes from the hospital? A lot of people parking there during the day?
Yes, it's with ET and colleagues have done quite a lot of analysis, and I think the hospital community is a big segment of those who park around the domain during the day.
Yeah.
There's a big issue about parking at Auckland Museum. You know, that's been in the press. We've seen that, and you know, it just kind of then transitions over across the domain as well. So we do see that as one of the contributory factors.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people in my community that nurses, that's where they park.
Yes, yes.
But prior, you know, a couple of years ago, we used to have a very good bus service from Howick that went directly to the Auckland Hospital, and so that was really good, but they've changed everything. So I think this is a time where we can really look at making some really positive changes, and I think if we can have more express buses that are just going through the domain and up near Auckland Hospital, that could actually be a really great help, and I think it'll help a lot of people in our communities, and it'll certainly help you. So I think that's something that we can, yeah. And it would also be good to have, we used to have, years ago, we used to have the free shuttle bus that used to go around Auckland, and then it would go up to farmers and that sort of thing. So it'd be quite good to have, during the day, some free shuttle buses that are possibly, or cheap, affordable shuttle buses that go around, and it'll be for the Auckland domain, and it'll also be for the Auckland Hospital, because we have got a big problem there. Thank you.
Thank you. This, I thought we'd done with parking yesterday, but obviously it always excites attention amongst all of us. Last question is Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Thank you, and thank you for the work that you're undertaking. Your Worship, this problem has gone on for a very long time. I think it's one where we almost need to elevate it to the CEOs of Auckland Transport. You know, perhaps it's a body of work that Jim could lead along with the museum, and that it's actually taken up and we look at a comprehensive solution. I know that there are some practical impediments in terms of infringements and so forth, and I'm very aware of the difficulties where our much valued nursing staff and others are using parking that is probably not appropriate. But rather than just sort of thinking about it occasionally, why don't we actually look for some solutions here? And if we elevate it to the CEO level, I think that there will be an opportunity, perhaps even for Jim and the officers to talk to their counterparts in health. This has gone on for a long time, since Lester Levy was chair of both Auckland Transport and with the hospital board. There was no desire on his part to build more car parking. And I think that there are solutions there, but we just need to give it the sharp edge in terms of the consideration, and perhaps that can come back to the Domain Committee or come back to the governing body, but I would welcome that, because we have an absolute treasure. We know because of COVID it's being used that much more, but the obligation is on us to find some solutions, and I'd like to think we can.
Thank you. I could possibly have preempted this long discussion by saying about half an hour ago, I just said to Jim, I think that's something that you need to take up with Auckland Transport. So let's explore that. We've had discussions that we haven't reached conclusions on about parking and car park metering in the domain that might stop the people that you know, it might be 400 metres is a long way with kids, but if you're working in town, it's probably the cheapest parking around in the domain. So we do need to address that, and I have asked Jim to raise that at a chief executive level with Auckland Transport. That finalises the questions, so thank you very much to the three of you for coming along. Congratulations for what you're achieving. We're all very proud of the museum and what it does, and we look forward to continuing to work with you constructively to improve that relationship. Thank you very much. And as museum representatives are leaving, we've kind of mixed comments with questions, so I'm presuming there won't be any comments. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We come to item number 11, which is a open process report in terms of Auckland Council Shaping Our Future program. It's about how we are looking at the changing needs and priorities of our customers and communities, and how we need to change and evolve to meet those needs and to set the priorities. But this will be discussed in the public excluded session because of the implications that it has about future negotiations and commercial activities. So I'll ask somebody to move this process only report. Desley Simpson, seconded by Angela Dalton. If there's no questions or comments, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We now come to another process report, the summary of information memoranda, workshops, etc. Can I ask somebody to move that? Linda Cooper, seconded by Tracy Mulholland. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 13, we've got the summary of confidential decisions and related information being released into the open. Equally, I'll ask somebody to move that. To Councillor Young, seconded by Councillor Collins. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We come to item, I think, 14. There is no extraordinary business. So I'll now move the procedural motion that we move into public excluded on the basis that this report contains information about services which could prejudice any future negotiations or commercial activities if not withheld. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Dalton. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. You've got to be quick to second a motion around here. So if I can ask officers to close the doors, and if we can cease our online coverage. So why don't we take a 1 minute, 2 minute break, and then we'll move to the one confidential item. And depending on how we go on timing, I'll ask you to consider whether you want to go straight into finance and performance or whether you want to take a break for lunch. But let's see how the next item goes. Thank you.
Hui Maine, and welcome to the extraordinary meeting for finance and performance. I have apologies from our two IMSB members, members Blair and Taipri. I have apologies from Councillor Newman and Sayers on council business. Any other apologies? No, I'd move those. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Stewart, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. I have a request for councillor attendance by electronic link. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Henderson and Councillor Bartley. I'd like to move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cooper, thank you. Councillor Cashmore, are you there?
Madam Chair.
Great. Councillor Henderson?
Sure am, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bartley?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, we've got moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? No. We've got no petitions, no public input, no local board input, no extraordinary items, no consideration of extraordinary business. I will now move procedurally for us to exclude the public for the reasons that this paper contains commercially sensitive information, and I have a seconder for Councillor Walker. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Just wait a couple of minutes while we close the doors. Thank you.